if I do this and then this and then this, is this presentation mode?
This is not presentation mode, but it seems to be your desktop being shared and not the PDF in Meet Echo. But it looks fine. At least that.
Click on the little star and go like monkey wrench and screwdriver thing and upload them through there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Except yeah.
And it should be fairly quick to do because you can just import them data tracker. Might be easier, whatever you like. Obviously, this is towards the end of an IETF meeting, so words are all failing me and I'm just babbling. Words.
Okay. Well, we'll see if this. So now we should. Oh, we're 1 minute over. So let's. How's that look?
That looks great.
Yeah.
All right. See how this works. Great. Well, if you don't mind, I'll kick us off. Welcome to what is probably your last IETF 111 meeting. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, maybe, to each and every one of you. And thanks to anyone in the Europe or further Eastern time zones who are here at weird hours. This is a IETF proceeding, and as such, it is subject to the note well, which I'm sure many of you have read or have heard if you've attended other meetings this week. But you can see it up here in that what you say, your contributions here, you are under and subject to the IETF process and policies. And as was noted on the first slide, this session is also being recorded. So I am Joe Clark, one of your three co-chairs. I'm joined, as always, by Tien Ren and Henk on the call, again, at various times. We have a Jabber room. In fact, many of you or some of you are participating in it right now here in Meet Echo or whatever client you're using. While we're, I have it, I can actually see it. So one of the chairs can act as the scribe. And as for minutes, we're using Cody MD for the minutes. And I pre-pinged Rob Wilton and Elliot Lear, if they've been so gracious to do this in the past for us, to take minutes to be our scribe. And they both said they would continue to do so. I hope that's still the case. I know, Elliot, you're going to be speaking, and Rob said he would jump in, and then I can help out on the ops area. And I already see in my other screen, someone is typing in Cody MD. So Rob and Elliot, are you still okay to do the minutes? Rob says yes.
Yeah.
And Elliot says yes too.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So the slides will be shared here, and they are available at that URL. And hopefully everyone jumped off into the Meet Echo room, because that's why you're here listening to me now. I'll do some of this and then hand it off to my co-chairs to jump in if any other context they want to add. You may have recently seen that RFC 9092 is published on finding and using geofeed data. So big thanks to the authors and the working group and contributors for getting that pushed through. Speaking selfishly, when we do get back to in-person IETF meetings, that kind of work could be very useful for us to be able to advertise where we are from a geofeed standpoint. We're really close on RFC 9105, which will be the Yang TACX Plus model. That's in Auth 48 state, and the authors have been very responsive to the RFC editor there. We have submitted for publication and gotten a lot of reviews, both from the working from the working group, from Rob or AD, from various other directorates and designated reviewers on the L3NM and VPN common modules. However, even though they're in a working group, or sorry, a IETF last call status, we're holding them pending work on the L2 network module, which is going to be presented here. So we're hoping that work goes through. And most recently, I think Tom Petch submitted a good review on L3NM to the list. I'll breeze over the next ones, and maybe Tianren and Hank, you can add more context. We did, I will say, on the MPLS SR label type, that was one where we said we wanted to move that ahead more quickly, and so we did there. So if anyone, Hank, Tianren, if you want to jump in. Actually, I see Rob just joined the queue. Maybe you want to speak up as well, Rob, on something I said about the L*NM modules.
Actually, it was just on the NTF module, the Opsawg NTF. Apologies, it's taken a long time to get through the review. I have started the review there, but completed it. I won't be able to do it directly after this meeting because I've been on holiday for a couple of weeks, but then it is top of my queue to then process. So apologies for the delay.
Hank or Tianren, anything to say on NTF or any of these other drafts in progress?
No more.
Okay. We're going to hear from Benoit on the two service assurance drafts today. As I mentioned, we'll hear from the L2NM, and the VPN service module is also, performance module, I should say, is also on tap. And we have, I think, all of these MUD and SBOM drafts as well we'll hear from today. Was there someone else entering the queue? Rob?
Rob.
Actually, I just wanted to update on the L3NM and the VPN common modules. Those actually have gone to IETF last call. I think I discussed with the authors. And then presumably we will hold them going to the ISG for the L2NM. Is that what you said before?
Yep.
Yeah, that's fine.
So
Okay.
Yep, thanks for confirming. Yes, and we are getting, as I mentioned, some good reviews on those two, L3NM and VPN common. All right. So we did see a liaison statement come through on quantum key distribution. It read mostly as an inform. I won't read the slide here, but you can see that there have been some recommendations on it published. And there's going to be continuing work. So out of their session, there was some additional documents adopted, some in progress work, some proposed work that they're going to continue to work on. And so you can see that they're continuing to evaluate the quantum key distribution methodologies here. And I see Elliot joining the queue. Elliot.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Joe. Apologies for not turning the camera on. It's just 1 in the morning here, and you won't like what you look at. The question I have was did SG13 specifically ship this to the ops area working group? Because I'm not sure what we have to do with this.
Yeah, I thought the same thing, and yes, they did. I was thinking more, and in fact, the Tank Tianren and I discussed maybe OPSEC, ops area as a broader potential area, but as far as I could tell, it was specifically sent to ops AWG. And now we've got 2 in the queue. Scott.
Hi, it's Scott. Can you hear me all right?
We can. A little
Yes.
soft, but we can hear you clearly.
Okay, well, I'll get a little closer. Yeah, study group 13 sent this directly to ops area. I am working with Warren and anyone else that cares to craft a response back to the study group 13. It also, we also need to add in some words from the IRTF as well. So if anyone's interested in looking at that response, just contact me as the liaison guy that's between the IETF and the ITUT. So if you have any
Thanks,
questions
Scott.
about where it came from and all that, so thanks.
Thank you, Scott. Karidi. If you're talking, Karidi, we cannot hear you. Okay, Elliot, we'll move on to you, and maybe hopefully things will get sorted out there.
Mike, again, I'm gathering that this is because of the control and management aspects, but in case, Scott, in case you didn't quite catch this, there was a discussion, I think Roman kicked it off in the security area about what to do about quantum crypto from an overall security standpoint. So there's definitely a process that's kicking off in the security area about this. And if it's not already in your response, you might want to talk to Roman about this, because it is something that I think he views as quite important.
Thank you, Elliot. Tianren, did you want to say something?
Yes, I see. If this is a new work, and if there's no home for this work, I think your Opsawg also could be a good home for this, and we can incubate this work in IETF.
If we can find a number of interested people in the Opsawg working group, it sounds like there might be some. Good point. I think, let me see. Yep. So that is the the Administrivia overview. This is our agenda. I know we're kind of running long on the Administrivia. So is there any agenda bashing? Hopefully you've all seen the agenda when Tianren sent it out a little while ago. We've got Benoit kicking things off with SANE, and then we're going into the L2NM, Bose, the performance monitor work, and then MUD and SBOM, and then we'll hand things over to, or on the PCAP with Michael, and then hand things over to Warren and Rob. Any agenda bashing for that? All right, Benoit, are you ready to kick us off?
Yes, I am.
All right, let me bring up your slides. Yang model, nope, that's not you. That's not you. Service assurance for intent-based network. How about that?
That sounds about right. Thank you.
Sure.
So, okay, what I want to do here is present those two slides. First of all, the service assurance for intent-based networking architecture. And second of all, the associated Yang module. So on behalf of all the authors, so let me present this. So as you mentioned, Joe, those two became working documents. So the version 0.0 was untouched compared to the private, the non-working group version. And so I'm going to stress the differences between 0.0 and 0.1. So 3-4 slides of background and then the diffs. So if you want to go to the next slide, these are slides that you've seen, but since they are becoming workbook documents, let me just set the background again. So what we're trying to solve is that whenever a service degrades, we want to understand quickly where the fault is and what the symptoms are in order to find the root cause. Right, and we don't speak about admin down because that's a very easy one, but the more complex one. And then we want to understand that whenever one component degrades or fails, what services are impacted. And it's what we've been missing in industry, right? The connectivity, the connection, sorry, between the operational state and the service context. So for this, we want to decompose the problem into smaller components that we call subservices. And we want to have an assurance graph. And if you go to the next slide, this is a picture we've been sharing in the past, where you see typically a tunnel or whatever type of service, and we're going to infer the health of that service based on the components that are depending on it. So typically for this tunnel, well, we need to have connectivity, we need to have the correct interface, the interface must be healthy, the IGP must be healthy, etc., etc. So we're going to generate an assurance graph with dependencies, and we're going to infer, so from the bottom to the top, the health of the service. So think about it like combined with the end-to-end probing that would give us the real close to the end user experience and will tell us whenever there's a problem. Now, if you combine this with end-to-end, which is considered network as a black box, and whenever you have this assurance graph, you can try to deduce where the problem might be. So this is the goal. And on the next slide, what we're solidifying in this in these two documents, first of all, the architecture. So from the top, you have a service configuration orchestrator. And the first arrow that goes down, it basically extracts or subscribes to the network service instance configuration. And from there, this is the input to generate the assurance graph. And whenever we know what needs to be collected from the network, we just go through one SANE agent or multiple SANE agents, and we ask to collect specific metrics from the network elements. And whenever we collect those metrics, we combine this into a health status per service and symptoms per subservice and symptoms per subservice that we stream into a collector. And if we do this right, that could be the basis for having a feedback loop to do reconfiguration. If we identify the specific subservice is impacting the total services. All right, so the two arrows there are the YANG modules that we want to standardize. And we don't plan to standardize the building blocks, which are an orchestrator or the SANE orchestrator or the agent or the collector. We believe it's more important to get the interfaces right. And on the next slide, we just want to stress that this architecture is open, because we're going to standardize the interfaces. It works for multi-vendor. If you have read the draft, you will see that you could augment the YANG modules for specific subservices and even vendor-specific subservice. And on top of that, you're about to connect graph from different domains, whether it's wireline or 5G or VIM. By just linking those graphs, you can extend this just beyond networking. All right, so let's go to the next slide. And let's review the changes that were introduced in this version 0.1. So we received some quite good feedback from Matt, who review all the editorial aspect, the consistency, the terminology, and all these editorial improvements were incorporated, but also the connection with the existing IETF work. You know, the four RFCs I'm showing on the screen there, with the SDN, service function chaining, service model explain, and a framework for automating service and network management with YANG. So as mentioned also, we stress early in the document that yes, this is an architecture, but the real meat is in a YANG module, which is a companion document. Okay, on the next slide, we had the feedback that we really wanted to have a real directed acyclic graph and not something that would look like a tree on the left-hand side. So we updated the figure. And looking at this now, maybe we want to just show the arrows for the direction. And on the next slide, yes, next slide, this one comes from Greg Mursky, who was stressing rightly that okay, we required NTP in the first version of the draft, but basically was writing that we require a time synchronization mechanism, and NTP is one of the candidates. So we corrected that that text. Okay, on the next slide, I want to show that the content of the graph, and you could make the link with the picture I've been sharing, right? I don't plan to go on every single Yang leaf, but just the sections. So what you see on the right-hand side is subservice parameters. In there, we're going to define a specific subservice type, like an interface, connectivity, etc., along with the parameters that are required for a subservice. Then the second section I want to stress is the health score and symptoms per subservice. And the last one is the dependencies I was explaining in the picture, where, by the way, dependencies could be like impacting or informational. That's a slightly longer discussion, but just to pick your curiosity to read the draft if you haven't done so. On the next slide, I'm showing here like two different subservices.
Elliot joined the queue. I don't know if you want to take questions during or
Please,
you wanted
yeah.
to. Okay. Elliot?
I want to say you look a lot better than I do at this hour, so congratulations on that. The question I have for you goes back to whether you're showing a tree or a DAG. And my only question is it possible that there are, in fact, in some case, should you allow for the model to actually identify circular dependencies?
I hope that there are no circular dependencies.
I mean, you would hope, right? But I'll give you, I could imagine, for instance, that maybe in some circumstances, particularly in complex environments involving, say, DNS or something like that, the tool could actually be used, in fact, to spot those and what might need to be done to avoid them. So all I'm saying is, from a conceptual view, right? Yeah, ideally you'd like a DAG, but what you might think about is that this might actually, the model actually might be useful to say, hey, wait a minute, look there, you have a circular dependency. You might actually use this thing to identify those.
Potentially. So first of all, I'm hoping we're not going to have like circular dependencies. The second thing is that whenever if we're showing like the figure again, a couple of slides back, maybe 3 or 4, slide 7. What we have there is actually some subservices with some parameters, right? You see a tunnel interface or a physical interface. So this is a subservice interface type, but with different parameter values. So, in that case, we have the same subservice type, but different parameters. So this is not really cyclic. But point taken that if we have a way to see circular dependencies, that would be good. Now, I've been scratching my head on an example, but if you have one in mind.
Yeah, I was going to say it's more likely that you'll see this if you go a little bit higher up in the stack. So your model is currently mostly driven to sort of a L1, L2, and then a little bit of L3 maybe. But if the model incorporates anything above that, like application services, database services, container functions, or anything else like that, I could very easily see the spaghetti showing a circular dependency from time to time. Particularly if say, a network infrastructure service uses a database service that in turn starts calling DNS functions for whatever reason, as an example, right? But maybe that's a little bit beyond where you intended in terms of the model. It's just something I thought of as somebody said, "Oh, it's a DAG." I was like, "Well, maybe, hopefully."
Okay, point taken, but actually going into the application layer is something which is welcome, right? Because service is service, right? What is your service? It's the application. This is like a flow. This is networking. So ideally, you want to extend this graph in multiple directions. So point taken. Let's brainstorm together if there is a way to detect circular dependencies and if this framework could be useful to do so. Make sense? I'll take it as a yes.
Karidi, you're in the queue as well. Assuming people can still hear me.
Yes.
You might still have some audio issues. If you want to put them in the chat, we can read them out. In the meantime, Benoit, we're at slide where I think you're on 10.
That's right, yes. So what I want to show here is basically two different subservices. One being the device, one the interface, the device being the red one at the bottom with one parameter. If we want to get the health of a device, there is one parameter, and this is a device ID. Now, if you want to create yet another one, the interface at the top, well, we need to have like two parameters, one being the device, and then the interface on that specific device. And that's a way to extend the graph with some specific subservice types. Okay, so now if we go to the next slide, we found a bug in the Yang module, which is like we forgot to mention mandatory true for the parameters of the subservice. So obviously a bug. Now on next slide, we added a parameter container because first of all, we found a misalignment in the examples. And second of all, we just made a clear container called parameters for all the parameters of the subservices. All right, and we call it parameters instead of having an identity name. So we had like identity interface, identity device, etc. Just more. It's just the right way to do it, I believe. Okay, on the next slide. Right, so if we take back this example from the architecture, we actually shown in a draft all the Yang modules, all the subservice types that are needed, you know, coming from interface, device, and IP connectivity and instances. So you could see the full set of Yang module. And if you go on the next slide, what we've been doing for that is that we added a full example of the Yang instance for that complete example, which is and then validated by JSON. Yang-son, sorry. And similarly, because we're adding new Yang modules, we included the Yang library for those Yang modules. And on the next slide. Right, since actually we created one Yang module, which is the main one, and as you have seen, we create multiple subservice types, so multiple Yang module. And we provided guidelines on those extensions. What should you choose as module name, module namespace, module prefix, specific identities and parameters? So a bit of text on that front. And on the next slide. Right, it's my last slide. The open issue that we have is one, which is that we want to reuse the terminology coming from NMRG, where there are two documents. One is about the IBN concept definition and IBN intent classification. It would be great to be aligned. And then now it's time for feedback, for question. And Kiriti, I see that you still have audio issues. Okay, let me read the question. Tunnels can recurse over tunnels, protocols over protocols. So the DAC may contain loops that has to be verified semantically. So Elliott's point is reasonable. Now, a tunnel over a tunnel. Well, that's what I was trying to say, that maybe the parameters are different, right? So if you got the same source and destination, then maybe there are different instances. Now, if you have a tunnel and it's captured into a tunnel and the parameters are the same, then we would need another parameter to distinguish those, I believe. Otherwise, yes, we have a problem. So I believe it boils down to how to get the right parameters that we've got something unique. And I'm not sure if I address your question, Kirati. Feel free to answer the chat. Otherwise, I see Rob wants
Rob,
to.
yeah.
Shall I go?
Go for it, Rob.
Just a quick question, Benoit. So I haven't read the latest version of this. I have read previous versions. With the parameters and the ability to augment the model and extend that, would you imagine extending specific parameters for specific subservices, or are the parameters kept very generic?
Can you rephrase your question, because I could answer it in two different ways?
So I was trying to work out with this model whether it just abstractly, I hadn't checked, defines parameters like a string and a value, or whether you expect specific parameters for specific subservices defined in the Yang model, which would then require custom code for handling. I didn't know which direction you go in those.
So let's say that we want to have an interface ID, right? We don't want to have simply like a string. So ideally, we want to get something that exists already in a Yang module. If we want to have a device ID, same thing. If you want to have like, I don't know, one parameter is, let me make up something like OSPF area ID, right? So we want to reuse something that exists as opposed to just have our own string, our own TLV, right? That we have to decode specifically within that this framework.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Benoit, I've got a question. So your open issues, feedback, and questions. I think you presented at the NMRG, and so your intent, so to speak, is to fold in some of the alignment work from there into your draft. And there didn't seem to be other issues other than maybe Elliott's point about the DAG versus the tree and the cyclic graph. So are you looking just now for additional feedback? Are you going to look at that work with Elliott? What are the author's plans for this?
So good feedback, better feedback, or more feedback would be welcome. I would like to discuss with Elliott and Kirati. As you've seen from the Yang Zone validation, we're trying to do a prototype. So we're also learning from that. So we don't want to say it's complete, but it's time to get more views and maybe code behind it.
Okay. So you have maybe some hackathon activities coming up as well.
Yes, we were short this time to do it, but that would be a great way to improve this. Yeah.
Thanks. As has been pointed out, we are running a little bit behind, so I don't think there's anyone else in queue. So if there are other questions, or Tianren, did something you want to say?
No, I just say we have run out of time.
So thank you, Benoit.
Okay.
I'll do a review of this, speaking as a contributor, and thank you, and we'll move on.
Thank you. Bye.
All right, Oscar, we need L2 and M, right?
Yeah. Can you hear me and see me properly?
We can.
Yeah, perfect. Because my internet connection here, I am at the mountains now, is not so great. Okay, so now let's go with the L2N module, which is like that complements the trilogy. So we already have the VPN and the L3 and M2 L3 services. So here, this is for the layer 2 VPN services. So here, just to a couple of useful pointers. So here you have the repository where we host the issues of all the network models. So just to let you know that we are all of them are compiled there under close. Okay, so it complements. It's a good complement to this. Also, we have the meeting minutes there. So please go to the next slide. So we'll present which are the updates that we have. So we receive a lot of feedback in this for completing this version of the model. So it's all documented. So we tried to cover all the outstanding issues. So it was mainly most of them were related to VPN. I mean, it was the type of VPN, the layer 2 VPN that took us more time. One big addition in this version of the draft is the two young modules that we have added. They are aimed at being maintained by IANA. So currently, IANA maintains a registry with the numbers for the encapsulation types and the wire types. So the idea that we have is to have young modules with identities matching those IANA values, and that as new types come on, whether they are encapsulation type or pseudo wire types, they come on, and they are included in the registry by IANA, that the new identities are created. So this way, extending the future maintenance of this model is easier because we decouple it, so we don't need to create those identities inside the L2N module. Also, we had some last comments that we fixed in the last weeks. We have the VPN common review that had some impact here in the L2NM, so we updated that too. And there was one last comment by Moti that we have been discussing in the last weeks about where to position the Ethernet segments. We'll talk about that later. So please go to the next slide so we can go through the summary of the main changes. So as mentioned, the VPN support is the main addition to the draft. So now we support the main RFCs of EVPNs, so VPN PLS EVPNs with PBB, virtual private wire service, and the applicability of VPN PLS. So that does not mean that EVPN is getting a lot of new additions. So as we'll see later, we'll be ready the model is ready to incorporate in the future new procedures that should be applied or configured to the VPN service. But now we focus on those that are more stable and mature. Also, we added the capability of the RT auto derivation. So here in the EVPN case, you can not only directly assign an RT value, but there are also possibilities that the RT values are auto derivated either by the controller or by even the network device itself. So we add that possibility. So you can leave the auto derivation. Also, we added the support for the different translate operations for the different push, pop, etc. of the label, and this translation is also included as part of the encapsulation. Okay, so go to the next slide, please. And then, as I mentioned earlier, one of the latest comments was where to position the Ethernet segment. So as the Ethernet segment, they are the links that connect a customer site to one or more provider edge.
So this entity itself, initially what we had it is under the VPN network access. So we just said, okay, this VPN network access points to this Ethernet segment, and in other VPN network access, if you point to the same one, so it means they are multi-home, and we were happy with that. But people were insisting, and that in best people had it as a separate entity, and that the Ethernet segments were worth having its own space. So now we are moved at the top level. So we have the Ethernet segments there, so they can be reused, and they can be assigned by different services. Okay, so they are higher in a position. So also, as mentioned earlier, we are supporting different flavors of EVPN. So we have created some identities for these EVPNs. And regarding the question of Kireti that I see it in the chat about, are these? Yes, and that option was already available in the VPN common draft. Okay, so here the part was specifically about the, I think, is artists, and I think they are this, if I don't remember well, for the VPN. Also, there are some cases where they could be auto-derived, and they are also included there. So next slide, please. So the connection container we did in the L3NM, we did a major review. So here we have done the same work. So just to remember, the connection container represents all the properties of the interface that connects the customer to the VPN instance. So here it was all the restructuring to to make it more clear. So separate, for example, just the encapsulation was clarified, because it was mixing a little bit of things. Now we have just a pointer to the bearer. So the bearer comes from the concepts of the L2SM, where there is the physical connection from the customer. Here we just had a pointer here, but in any case, all the details go to the draft, but it's redone, all these containers. So next slide, please. Also, we added a set of global parameters profiles, so they are reusable in the same service instance. Okay, so we defined it at the service level, and then you can reuse them in different nodes and in different VPN network accesses. So here, in cases with large configurations where you need to repeat many things, we think it's very useful, this global profile. So next slide. So here, just to not to eat all the time. So here there are some of the important issues that we solved: the solved model type, the prism-humanity definition, some validation for the .1Q, the reference of the bidder, the RTO derivation, lag, and we had one question of having the lag interface as a standalone object, but I think we definitely ended up having it just a pointer, because we didn't want to create, and just to recall that this is not a device model, and also this is not aimed at managing the interfaces of the lags. We just made the pointer here to whatever structures are necessary. Okay, so next slide, please. So we added also some examples in the draft, so the readers and the implementers can see how the draft is used. Okay, so also, please, feedback on the examples is welcome, and if you want more examples and more type of example, we will be happy to add more of those. Go to the next slide. So we have solved all the pending issues in the GitHub. Now we have received recently a review from Joe. Thank you very much, Joe, for that. So we'll work on that as soon as possible. Just please allow us some time because we are in the holiday season. We have most of the key authors out, so we'll take a little bit to solve that. But we think with that one solved, we are ready to go for the working group's last call. And just to know that the model is prepared to support new functionalities if they evolve in the IETF. So there are some drafts, for example, for the multi-homing, that these functionalities can be incorporated in the service as they can. So with this, I finish and open for questions.
Doesn't look like anyone in the queue. Yeah, the holidays I fully expected, and I think we said to Med that we'll do an extended last call. On your models prepared to support new functionalities, are you expecting that work to fold into the module before it is fully ratified, or are you expecting it to be extensible after the fact for these new services or new functionalities?
I think the second one. I don't. When we close the model, we'll close with mature procedures. Okay, so if there are any procedures that are still in debate, or there are some things that I think it's better to add them at a later stage and have the model ready. I mean, to capture these new procedures as they come.
Okay. And Caridi says we have a prototype implementation. We'll send you details, Oscar.
Okay, thank you. So I mean, we can document them in the appendix, and also receive all the feedback from the implementation, because this is what improves the draft.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Well, thank you very much, Oscar. And thank you for staying up late with us.
Yes, so here is almost 2 a.m.
So we have Bo next.
Hello.
Hey, Bo, you're a little soft. If you could speak up or get closer to the mic, that would be helpful.
Okay. So is it better?
A little bit better, yeah.
Okay. And this is Bo. Hello, everyone. I'm here to represent all the authors to present this network and VPN service performance monitoring model. Next slide, please. Here I will give a brief background on this draft. This draft was adopted in last IETF meeting, and this model, this draft is trying to complement the layer 2 NM or layer 3 NM, like just Oscar presented. You can see, as you can see that in the figure, network service model, mostly for the service configuration, and this network and VPN service performance monitoring model is supposed to do the service monitoring. Next slide, please. About all the updates on this revision. Actually, this revision mostly resolved the comments from the working group adoption that we received. I also put a link here to referring to all the issues that we addressed in this revision. You can see that these issues has been tracked along with other layer XNM models, and the issues about this revision mostly related with like how to we should add in some layer 2 VPN MAC entry counters, and also add like a PM resource to indicate what's the protocol for those performance monitoring metrics. And we also have the comment that we should reuse the most definition of the VPN common. So we add it as a normative reference, and we also reuse the definition of VPN common, like topology role or some service name, etc. And we also add the example of to show how percentile is used. So next slide, please. For the young model updates, as I just mentioned, we add a new container for MAC number to also include to support layer 2 VPN metric entry counters, like not only just like the previous revision, just support the layer 3 VPN root counters, but this time we add MAC table counters also. And on the right, we add the, you can see that we add a new leaf PM source to show the link performance data coming from like something like the layer 2 OM defined in layer 2 NM. So this is for the young model updates, because the most young structure hasn't changed much. These two are the new nodes we added to this model. And next slide, please. Oh, that's the last one. And I think right now we don't have the open issues here, and because the design team right now focused on layer 2 NM, and there are a lot of heavy discussions. So we are planning to do more improvements after the layer 2 NM the working group last call, and we also selected more comments and reviews from working group. That's all. Thank you.
Yeah, Mo, I had a question on this. I'll read. Admittedly, I haven't read the latest version. So the way you describe PM source and the way I see it here as a string, I'm kind of curious. Is that the right way to model that, or is there some way of kind of referencing that back to something, or using like an identity or something more normalized?
Yeah.
I guess.
I actually checked with layer 3 NM and also layer 2 NM drafts, and to see, and also VPN common draft to see whether there is some like identity to, but it seems that we cannot list all of those, and they could have many of sources. Like sometimes the source maybe is not directly from OM protocols. Like sometimes they just from I think in my memory, I think I looked through all those drafts, and I can't find a list of OM protocol defined, and they just list one, and so there is no one place to refer to. So I think this is an open issue. I will work on the next.
Okay.
On the later on. I think it's a good question, and because right now it seems a string, and people will feel confused when setting this.
Thanks for the explanation and looking into it. Other questions, comments on performance monitor draft? Thank you very much, Bo.
Thank you.
We have got, who's up next? Elliot. Discovering and retrieving software transparency and
Hi there.
vulnerability.
Okay,
SBOM access.
so Rob, if you'll cover minutes for me, I see. Okay, great, thanks. All right, so I'm here to talk about two drafts, and I'll try to be brief. I'm speaking today on behalf of myself and Scott Rose in terms of draft IETF SBOM access 2. Next slide, please. All right, so what's this draft about? This is meant to answer two questions. What software is on a particular system, and what vulnerabilities does that software have? Now, the second bullet is a change from the previous draft. We added vulnerability information. I'll talk more about that in a minute. Next slide, please. Okay, so as I mentioned, we've added support for vulnerability information. I did a lot of rewording of the introduction to try and make the motivation a little bit clearer. We've redone the well-known prefix just so that we can handle both vulnerabilities and SBOM. And we added support for OpenC2, which is an OASIS protocol that is under development. Now, OpenC2 is not like a RESTful endpoint, it's a protocol endpoint. And so I've been in touch with the OpenC2 people, and what we should probably be thinking about as this thing head towards working group last call is just to liaise with the OASIS people to say, hey, we're coming close here. Do the references look good? Can you confirm that this is something you want to have supported and things like that? I think they'll tell you yes, but getting a formal review of the draft from them might be helpful. We fixed some versioning for cloud-based access because previous versions had, if you were pulling a live copy of a software bill of materials, you would also get versioning, and that was just wrong because you get what the versioning was there if you needed to look up a SBOM by version, but if you were just pulling something live off a system, you got what was actually installed. The functionality is actually working on mudmaker.org/test, and you can play around with it. Next slide, please. Okay, just a reminder as how all this might fit together, right? This is more for review. You might have some console that sits there on the right, and it will take in information and where you see the word VEX, that's vulnerability information. It'll take in vulnerability information, CVEs, software bills of materials in the form of SPDX or Cyclone. That should say Cyclone DX, not CyberDX. And it will discover this information via MUD, right? And then based on that, match CVEs against CVEs for the installed software that is indicated by the SBOM, right? And then you use the vulnerability information that the vendor provides to say, hey, wait a minute, I've already fixed this CVE, so don't bother warning the user about that being installed. Now, the little fiducius that you see there is basically meant to be like a medical device manufacturer. And here they might use other mechanisms to collect the same sort of information. MUD is primarily useful as a network discovery mechanism, but the file format in terms of how you go find the SBOM information, if you happen to be a developer, might still be useful. That's a little more speculative. The focus is really on the top left, leading to the top right. So that's basically the vision for a lot of this stuff. Next slide, please. Okay, so just to remind you, there are 3 classic methods for providing this information. The information might be on the box, so your software inventory might be available directly on the box. And if it's like a Linux system, you can think of this as something like dpackage or RPM providing you information. It could be off the box. Now, this is going to be for like really small systems. So a good example might be, suppose you have a sensor that's trying to detect whether cement has dried, and the company, there are companies like Wholesome that use these sensors, and they last for 6 weeks. They may, if you want to see the software bill of materials for that thing, it's not going. There's going to be no interface to the device, because all it's going to do is transmit it in low frequency for about 6 weeks and then die. And then OpenC2 on the box. Again, this is part of the OpenC2 framework. Now, another key point is that the draft is format neutral. There are some amount of there are a number of formats that are in place. Cyclone DX is one. SPDX is another for SBOMs. For vulnerability information, people seem to be aiming towards something called the Common Security Advisory Framework, and that is also work being done by OASIS. And so I've been talking with them about this as well, so that you could get this, so we can get pull that information. Next slide, please. So here's the model. It's no, I don't call it SBOM at the module level layer anymore, and that's because we're including these two different types of information, which is to say, software bills of material and vulnerability information. And you can see here in the model that you can have one or more SBOMs based on for the cloud, but you're not going to have that for other mechanisms. And the same is true for vulnerability information, which leads to a question. Next slide, please. Okay, one question is, does it make sense to actually have vulnerability information come from the device itself? Or is that something that's just going to be on out there on the vendor website? And you can think of vulnerability information in CSAP in particular as things like PCERT advisories saying, hey, we've got some vulnerabilities, or no, this thing isn't vulnerable, as an example. Second question is, do we have the right security model? Some stuff that really needs testing. The current security model for this work is if it relies on the underlying mechanisms like HTTP, co-op, and etc. I think a little bit of deployment experience will tell us whether we have this right. In particular, if vendors want to hold a software bill of materials close to the vest, there will be a login step, and then perhaps an OAuth token will be exchanged into a tool. And so there might need to be some interaction initially as devices in order to collect certain software bills of material. It could be that the tooling vendors actually have have special relationships to allow it to provide this information. A lot of that will have to be explored as the tools mature. Finally, as Hank is here, he and I talked about Quorum CoSWID, and do we want to support these? Now, we're format neutral. Quorum, as Hank explains it to me, is neither fish nor fowl in terms of it's not really a software bill of materials on its own. It's a little bit something else. And so while yes, we're format neutral, this is something slightly different and might need to add a little bit more into the model. And if Hank wants to say more, he can. But maybe I'll just hold that to the end, which might be the next slide in terms of this draft. Next slide. Yeah, so proposed next steps. I'd like to start getting some reviews from different areas, and I'd really like a little bit of guidance on security. I think I have this right. I've tested something along these lines, but some broader security review would be good. Though that well-known URI review is also helpful. I did get one comment back from Patrick saying, do we really have to have a top level transparency endpoint? Can we just have vuln and SBOM as the top level well-known endpoints? And I think that should be a question that I just ask the reviewers and then take their advice based on their response. I don't think anybody really cares what the names are, as long as they follow whatever procedures are in place for Get Off My Lawn, which is the name of the RFC that governed this. And then my hope is to sort of get that done. And then just a little before the next IETF, we enter working group last call, which brings us back to the co-room question, which is, can the co-room stuff be ready in time? And do we really want to include that here? So that's it for this draft. Questions?
Hank, it looks like
Okay, I'm not seeing any questions.
I think Hank is in the queue, maybe as a contributor.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. Finding the right button here. It's a little bit late already on my end. But
Yeah.
Elliot's also in the same time zone. So this is Hank. Can you hear me? Oh, yeah, my audio.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Where to start? So I like this this top level semantics of transparency, because it gives you insight into the device that this is all about. It's kind of aligning with the various efforts that are now rippling through several US bodies here in the moment about the supply chain security. So that aligns well, I think. Then about the very explicit format that is CoSWIT. In the CoSWIT, I don't know, introduction for like, I don't know, 5 years now. It's took long in the making here. Because it was the very first thing in CDSC were to be created at that front. It says this is used for vulnerability assessment. So VEX is doing nothing else here, I think. VEX is this association of vulnerability information to SBOMs to some extent. So I think that also fits together well. I think the NTIA issued a minimal element for SBOM recommendation recently, and that included SWIT/CoSWIT as one of the mandatory software identifiers. So that's there now, for at least for now. It's a moving target because this is all very hastily being stitched together. So that might evolve. Typically, I'd say for MUD, don't worry about content format too much, but maybe provide an option to enumerate these and add these to the, what do you think you're actually fetching there? Will this be an SPDX? Will that be a Cyclone DX expression? I think that's interesting to the manager that is consuming the MUD URL and then consuming the MUD file and then fetching all that in the end. Otherwise, it's just a big surprise. So that might be something. And then you can just add, for example, to a list of formats, CoSWIT, but you don't have to worry about the actual encoding in the end. And final comment on CoRIM, that definitely uses CoSWIT. So that's where the hard overlap with rats is, because rats, the muddy rats, will discover CoRIM. And there will be CoSWIT in these. And there might be some semantic overlap with then the transparency module here that also could discover a CoSWIT more explicitly, but under the SBOM leaf. So in rats, it's under the CoRIM statement, and here it would be under the SBOM statement. So that might not be bad at all. But we really have to at least spell that out once, that there might be other means to find these specific items. So these are my comments on here. And how this will be done, I actually don't know. It's 3 AM here. I have no idea.
Okay, thank you for that, Hank. Let me just add 1 or 2 comments there. The draft, in terms of the way it works, is, and I think I could do a little bit better on this, but the intent, right, is to look at content type in terms of the response, and say, and for the tooling that's retrieving this stuff to either take all comers or silently discard stuff it doesn't understand. I think we can be a little bit more granular than that, which is, these formats that are available are between Cyclone DX and SPDX and maybe even SWIT, I'm not sure. But certainly with the 2 former ones, they're interchangeable, and because the information elements are almost the same, and so the producer might produce both. And at that point, if the thing sits off in a cloud, it may be reasonable to include an accept header. it's a little less reasonable to include an accepts header when you're going through the device, because I don't know that it'll have all the tooling to generate this, that, or the other type of format. So I think I'll take that as an open issue and work on that if you don't mind. And then for CORIM, I'll just add, I think what we'll do is we'll continue our conversation. We'll look at timing. I don't want to hold this up too much, precisely for the reasons that you mentioned, which is that given the regulatory pressures, and it's not just coming from the US, that I think people do need to start to put together their building blocks, and this, discovery of where the SBOM is and where this vulnerability, where the vulnerability information is a big part of that. If they can't figure out where it is, what are they going to do? Use postal mail? So.
Yeah, I think not delaying this too hard is I think a very good objective, and I assume that all these items can be resolved in a matter of 1 or 2 months, and that should be ready for next IETF meeting.
Yeah. So my request to the chairs is only this, which is to help facilitate area reviews, early area reviews at this point.
Got it. Yeah, we'll get this teed up for some directorate reviews.
Yeah, and the Yang, also there should be like a Yang review too, because I always make Yang mistakes, and that needs to get cleaned up.
We'll get this in front of Yang doctors.
Thank you. Okay, next slide, please. And I'll press on from here. This one I'm going to be extremely brief on. Karsten found a problem. The problem was he couldn't copy MUD files from some third-party providers because he didn't see any permission statement. And so there's no way in the JSON to express copyright and licensing terms. So this extension does that. And it could be used by others apart from MUD. So I made it, you don't see MUD in the name of the draft. But the idea is to allow, if somebody else runs into this problem with JSON at rest, that we can solve it there. Next slide, please. So here's the model, right? You have a list of owners. There's a license type. This equates to an SPDX tag. SPDX has a fairly complete list of common licenses, but if you don't want to use one of those, provide a pointer to your own, and that's the entire model extension. My proposal at this point, next slide, please, is to have discussion. Okay, so I think I've explained this already. Next slide, please. Is to have discussion, but could we please adopt this draft and just knock it through? And that's it.
Thanks, Elliot. I think we can bring this up. It does seem, I haven't read it all the way through. It does seem like interesting work. Hank, did you want to say something? I see you green.
Yeah, I think put the request for this on the, it might have already been there, to the Opsawg WG list, okay. And then we can, confirm that as a request for working group adoption. It is relatively easy to review, I'd say. So it is relatively easy to find people who might have an opinion about this, and then we can move this along.
Right, and then once that's done, I'll ask again for a Yang, in particular a Yang doctors and Gen Art review for this one.
Copy that.
All right, that's it for me. Thank you very much. I hope I took less time than I was allocated.
I think you did okay. Actually, are you still up? Or we're on the Michael. Let's see, we are at operational considerations for use of DNS and IoT devices, operational considerations. Here we go. Michael, take it away.
Can you hear me? Good. So this document was adopted a while ago. Next slide, please. And it was, I took it to the DNS op working group in March. We had an interesting conversation, and that went really well. If you're interested, watch the video. That's the offset there. It's like 10 minutes long. But most of the advice was essentially telling us that a lot of it's not going to work. So next slide, please. So the fundamental issue comes down with MUD files and IoT devices and things that are like geofenced or otherwise depend on content where the server gives out a different answer depending on who's asking. And the issue is that if the IoT device gets a different answer than the MUD controller, then the access control list is not created correctly, which usually will result in the MUD device, the IoT device, trying to access a resource on the internet and being denied because it's got the wrong IP address or an inconsistent IP address. And then what does that do? Well, it probably, if things are working right, it sends off an alarm, which is, of course, a false positive, and gets everyone upset because false positives cost a lot of money to investigate, and it's hard to know what's going on for that. So next slide. So the summary was it's not going to work. Sort of having a magic DNS server that the MUD controller would use and probably control, and the IoT device would be convinced to use, that could do things like ignore the time to live as appropriate, or at least inform the MUD controller when a query returned a different answer, or a bunch of stuff like that that we could consider. And well, that is conceivable in a home network scenario where it's all in your home router, the MUD controller, the DNS server, and everything. It's not going to work well in the enterprise scenarios that Elliot likes, and I think that we should care a lot for. So my only real conclusion is to suggest, if this really doesn't work, to tell vendors in the document, please don't do this. That may be very unpopular, but it may be what we need to say is don't do this. It isn't going to work. Next slide, please. That's it for that document. Maybe we can have some Elliot.
So the DNS ops people may not like some of the things that actually get done to deal with this.
Yeah.
So one of the things that can be done, and this works fine as far as it goes, right, is that the queries can be intercepted in the network, and then you just deal with the response and record the response, and then you just manage things like you be conservative in terms of expectations of cache timeouts. What's important for the client is simply that if the connection breaks, they should retry a query, not just go directly to the old address because the cache may have expired. The other point, and we did discuss this, I think, on list, is that if there's more complete integration between the name service function and the access control function within the network, then this problem is obviated, and I think that was pointed out on list. So sorry.
So all of that's a good suggestion, and it completely breaks, of course, as soon as the device decides he wants to do DNS over HTTP. And I actually think that one of the advices to IoT devices is they really shouldn't do that. That it breaks all sorts of other things that people assume they want to do. And so I really think that actually may be an additional strong suggestion to manufacturers. And I think that part of the problem here, Elliot, is that this has got to be advice to IoT manufacturers, and they don't know if it's what kind of a MUD environment it's going to go into. And so they have to figure out what they can do. And I don't know, we might even need to go to the point of saying whether or not declaring in the MUD file whether the device is compliant to some piece. I don't know if that makes any sense to you.
Yeah, I think we need to continue work on this draft a little bit more to get the advice to manufacturers consistent in terms of how make sure that they should be careful about how they do cloud-based services and in terms of addresses, and that this is not a high volume service, or shouldn't be considered a high volume service. So you shouldn't have to worry too much about having to heavily load balance this stuff. But I think that even that advice, I'm nervous about giving it because I think the better approach is to work it in the deployment rather than to work it on the device. I think that's what you heard from the DNS ops people too.
Sure. Okay. All right. Anybody else?
Not seeing anyone else in queue.
Can I have the next, the
You
acceptable
can.
URLs document?
Bringing that up right now. Acceptable URLs coming at you.
Thanks. So next slide, please. So the fundamental question comes down is, you know, how do you change or update your MUD file? And the document, as we've gone through this before, there's two kind of ways. You can change the URL or you can change the content of the MUD file. For an awful lot of things, just updating content of the MUD file probably is the right answer. But there are some issues, particularly when it overlaps with firmware updates that do different things. If you are using Tiru's document on TLS profiles, for instance, you could create a lot of false positives if your firmware update then includes, say, a difference in a TLS version. You need to make sure that the old firmware uses the old profile and the new firmware uses the new profile. And I think that's pretty important for some things. So then the question is, if you want to update the URL, how do you do this? Next slide. So we've had some different ideas, and the fundamental one is that we're saying that we need to update 8520. Gee, I feel like it's 8250, 8520, to say that the base URL must always be the same and that you can change the last component. So I think next slide has an example. Yeah, just go to the next one after that. So the next time example, so if you start off with the first one, and it says mud001.json, that you could change it to mud002. That's allowed. Remember, it has the printer 4567. That's all changed, stay the same. But if you changed it to gamepad2 or something like that, that's not allowed. Or if you change the domain name, that's also not allowed. And so this means that you can change your MUD URL in your DHCP or your LLDP reply, and that's okay. But the first one that you got was either trust on first use or it came from the IDEV ID when you did enrollment, and that's what you started with. The other thing to import is that within the MUD file, there is a reference to the MUD file URL. So if you want to do something, you know, like completely reparent where it is, well, first of all, you need to update it in its old location, and then that becomes the new base URL for the next iteration of things. It's a two-step process. And I think that handles all of the issues with mergers and acquisitions and the fact that marketing wants to rebrand everything or something like this. And they just need to do it in two steps. That's all. Next slide, please. I think that's the last one. Yeah. So adopted in 2012. I don't think there's anything really else to say about it. I'd like to have some more reviews and some other stuff like this. And I think we're pretty close to having a working group last call. Any questions?
Also get some direct reviews on this as well.
Yeah, that's what I'd like you guys to do, push the right buttons.
Questions on acceptable URLs? You have two more slides here, but I guess those were...
There's for questions. Yeah.
Okay.
That was for questions if someone really wanted to know something, you know,
okay,
really terrible about how it works.
So if no other questions, we can move on to, I think we are at PCAP.
It's me again. Yeah, looking for my other hat. I don't have another hat here to wear. Sorry. Hi. So it's me again. I want to talk to you about PCAP and PCAP NG. These are two documents that are there. One is, oh, I mistyped the second one. I'm sorry. It's Opsawg PCAP NG. And these are things that have existed for PCAP has existed for around 30, 35 years or so like this at this point. Next slide, please. So this was first discussed in IETF 90 in Toronto. I remember having a conflict and couldn't come to that session. And Michael Tuxen, was enthusiastic about putting it forward, and it was hard to push up the hill at the time. And so I'm back with you. I'm wearing the hat of being the maintainer of TCP dump, and there's a number of the other authors are involved in other pieces like this. And so it's used, the PCAP format is used really everywhere by all sorts of people, OARC and other DNS people, and Jeff Houston uses it all over the place and stuff like this. And probably most of you have used it at various times. Next slide, please. So the PCAP document is proposed to be informational. You could even publish it as historic if you thought that was a good idea. I don't think I really care one way or the other, but documents have gone out and gone to historic immediately. It was originally written by Van Jacobson in around 1987, and the PCAP group took over in the late 90s. We cannot go to independent submission editor. We've determined because there is an IANA registry that we need to create, and we cannot create them properly from an ISC stream. So it has to go through a working group or an AD sponsor. And I'll just mention that one of the things about PCAP files is you can't cat two of them together. You can't concatenate them together and get a sensible result. Next slide kind of explains that. Next slide. So that's because there's this green header at the beginning of each packet. If you want to know the shape and the size of that L2 header, you have to know the link type. And it says we have about 290 of them, and they're not all IP. Some of them are USB. Some of them involve things like radio strength values. There's just a wide variety of things that people have decided they want to put in PCAP format because they capture things in certain things. An awful lot of them are IP over foo for wide varieties of foo to do this. And as I said, the offset into where the L3 starts is unknowable until you know the link type. So that's an unfortunate attribute of this, and that's how it's been for 30 years. Next slide, please. So the PCAP NG effort started around 2007, particularly in the Windows port of TCP dump. They discovered they needed to do other things because the content was not that they could get out of the capture mechanisms was weird and different. And Wireshark, if you're familiar with that, has definitely run with it, and it reads and writes them more or less by default as PCAP NG. I personally hate that name NG. I think anything NG needs to be renamed before it's used. But I, won't fall on that sword. There's a whole bunch of stuff in this document right now because it's become so a bit of a dumping place for anything that was new kinds of blocks. And so there's a few, like for instance, the systemd logging block that probably could be moved to a different document. Such that this could be about IP capture only. So the link type again is in common with PCAP, but that's it. Next slide, please. The file otherwise has a series of section header blocks, enhanced packet blocks, interface description blocks, and they can be interspersed in any way, in any order that you like. So if you have the statistics for how many packets you've captured and how many you've dropped, and it's convenient, you can put that in every 1,000 packets or something like this. You can change the link type between what are now called enhanced packet blocks, and so you can capture from different sources and put them in different places in different ways. So there's a lot of different ways of doing that. That's been the major change to this. If we started this now, well, we do it all in CBOR with a CDDL description, but that's kind of a bit late for that. So we could publish this as an informational because there's not as much change control to the IETF as perhaps everyone would like. But I would only want to do that if the desire was then to start, a PCAP 3 working group or something like that. Other than that, I think it just should be published, and people we can revise it later on. There's a bunch of other IANA registries that this requires to create, and most of them would be either first come, first served, or specification required, but not necessarily requiring IETF action or review. Next slide, please. So we've talked about this on and off for a long time. I would love if we could just adopt it. I would love suggestions on whether or not you agree with me that you hate NG, or we'll just continue. I think we do need, for the PCAP MG, we probably need a small design team to meet a few times to polish the document off and deal with content, and I would propose to organize that. But basically, I'd like to finish it off quickly, and then if someone wants to make a revision, that's great. Let's do that. And I think that's the last slide. Elliot.
It is, and we have Elliot in the queue. Elliot?
Okay, I will turn on my video just for a few moments. First, thank you, Michael, for that marathon of presentations. My suggestion is we split the discussion into two. The PCAP draft is pretty clearly informational. There's very little, if any, development going into PCAP, if I understand correctly. That's not entirely true, right? You can, but maybe it is mostly true. I'm not sure.
Well, so the word PCAP out there outside the IETF refers to a variety of different things, including how you get packets out of the kernel. And since a lot of people would like to do that at 10 gig and write them to disk, there are actually some considerations back and forth, but those are coding considerations, not IETF considerations.
Okay, as long as the specification is stable and done, I'd say just I would support the idea of adopting and going to informational pretty quickly. The PCAP NG is, I have a couple of questions. My recollection from the previous discussions about this draft was that there was strong support, particularly in the Wireshark community, for this stuff being worked on at the IETF. And yes. So that's really good. The question I have is the velocity of change for new blocks and things that might require updates of the RFC itself. Is an RFC the right vehicle here is the only question, is what it boils down to. Is the work going to be is the velocity of work so fast that we won't be able to keep up? That's my question.
So the work is cumulative. So the stuff that is out there in the document, with a few exceptions where I think that it just crosses over boundaries of who needs to know what, is pretty much stable. Yes, there's new things added, and that's why I'm saying there is an IANA considerations for getting block types, and I don't think that we need to do IETF actions on them. It's enough. We should have a first come, first serve area, which is generous, and we should have a specification required, which doesn't mean IETF document. Just, here's a URL on a website, okay, that describes it, and there. And what we may do if they are network related, the new block types, is we may come back in 5 years and merge them into a new document so that they're clearly documented. But essentially, yeah, you're right. I think the Wireshark community, we deal with a new link type request, which is not the same as a block request, but a new link type request approximately twice a month, okay, at this point. But again, these are mostly people doing, like, I'm capturing from this weird thing that does this thing and measures fish and whatever, and we just say, well, is there a statable specification we can point to? And that's the same as what IANA would do. We got some other people, Warren and Rob.
Yes, I was just going to comment on the PCAP doc. I asked my fellow ADs, and they said that going directly to historic would also be fine.
Yes, and I think that would state that actually would really represent the reality, right?
So that seems to make sense. But also support adopting the PCAP NG. I think it's good, useful work to take forward if there's interest.
Warren? Are you there, Warren?
Yep. Just waiting to be called on. So, no worries. So for the NG work, how much support is there in the wider community? Like not the IETF community, but the PCAP community, whatever that means, and will we be stepping on anyone's toes?
Oh, so all right. So I'll make it clear. I run the TCP dump group, so I'm the maintainer of libpcap, and most of the people who are extremely active in that area are co-authors on this group on this document already. Gerald Coombs, who's one of the co-authors, is the maintainer of Wireshark. How many more reviewers can we pull out of the Wireshark community? That's an open question, and I hope the answer is at least 10. But I don't think we're stepping on anyone's toes, or
okay, good.
Be my own.
And Elliot, one more question quickly, if you can.
I think I'm willing to support the adoption of this work, but I don't think that new work should just be randomly thrown around in other documents elsewhere out, in some random URL in terms of the description. And I think as best as can be done, if the work's going to be done here, let the work be done here. And if you want to, I'm not saying you have to immediately shove everything into an internet draft before you actually do the PCAP work, but rather, maybe have a running set of updates in terms of modules, and then periodically produce that as an internet draft that actually does get published, so that if somebody's looking to actually implement all of this, the work is within the series and kept within the series. I'm really uncomfortable with the idea that we're going to specify just the base work, and then people have to go to random locations to try and do a full implementation.
So Elliot, I think you're misunderstanding some of it. So 99% of the time, people in the link type they use is 10 megabit encapsulation, because that's Ethernet and there's no other thing. The next most common one is the Linux any device encapsulation. Those are both described in the document, right? That way, and the Linux one tells you which interface it came from as well. So then we get into the esoteric types, and we get into things like, for instance, capture of USB packets, right? Very much not the IETF's issue, but it's, you have a USB capture device, and it puts it in PCAP format.
Right. I'm just saying that if the work's coming here, let the work come here. And I understand that it's not just, I don't view that as all that esoteric, Michael. And I think one of the things, I'll tell you what, let's do this. Let's have this as an open issue for discussion going forward, so we can move beyond this now. But I think it is an open issue.
I agree.
I will say that the link type things is essentially, if I show those pink boxes, is what's that L2? If there's an L3, how do you find it, right? That's what the description is. And it's very actually frustrating to people that it's not more easy to do, and it's not self-describing, for instance. But this applies both to PCAP and to PCAP NG equally. So I'd be very happy to have that conversation as part of the PCAP NG process. But I would like, as I think you said, let's just publish the other one as historic, because we can't change anything particularly about, we can't, adding to that document is not going to help anybody, is what I'm trying to say.
So I had a similar comment to Elliot, but in time, or in consideration of time, thanks for presenting, Michael. I think there's clearly some interest in this. We'll bring it to Ops Area Working Group list for an adoption call on the PCAP NG work. And I agree with what others have said around the PCAP as an informative base to that. So likely we'll see what the working group thinks about the NG work, and then based on that, we can move forward with both documents.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for your time.
Thanks. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we are on the Ops Area portion of our program. So I would like to hand it over to Robin Warren, and I will start doing some minutes work over here. I can still do the slides if there are slides. I didn't see anything from Torlis or from either of you, so maybe you will want to share if you have slides.
I thought we'd sent over the slides. Didn't really. Well, they didn't really say very much other than hello, Oh, I guess I could turn on my camera. They didn't really say anything other than hello, everybody, and welcome to the Ops area part of Ops area and Opsawg. The person over there is Rob. Wave, Rob. The person over here is Warren. Hi, I'm Warren. We don't really have much in the way of updates. I think our primary thing was the open mic thing, open mic time where people can throw tomatoes at us. But before that, we have, actually, I'll just hand it over to Rob. He can do the intros.
I can do the intros. Which intros?
Didn't we have a tourless presentation?
Yes, do we want to do that first or do the open mic first?
I guess let's do the tourless presentation first, just because that way any leftover time can be used. Actually, I guess maybe we should do it in the other thing. Does anybody have any open mic questions for us? Questions and or complaints? And or general feedback?
Stuff we can do better? No.
Apparently everybody thinks we're doing an awesome job or is just too terrified to provide feedback. Well, let's do tourless and people can think of questions in the meantime. And maybe at the very end, if there's time, people can tell us what we're doing poorly. Of course, that might take much more time.
I see Charles on. I don't see him in the queue or trying to unmute. Charles, all you. I didn't get any slides from you either, so if you have some, by all means, either make them aware to me or you can share.
I've just pinged Turles, but I'm not getting any.
So perhaps we're not going to do that section and he fell asleep. So does anybody have any other comments or questions for us? Or would you all, especially people in Europe time zone, like, what, 20 minutes of your night back?
Well, the only thing, Warren, is because it was the last 15-minute slot, I think, for Turles. So I don't know whether he's somewhere else as well. He's waiting for that slot.
I guess that we can have Rob do interpretive dance for 15 minutes. I'm not going to have to do that because
thank you.
In the past, when I have, people have asked me to never do it again. Alternatively, we could talk some more about PCAP NG, but I think that we have a plan for that.
Actually, one other thing we could raise that came up, and Warren's going to hate this because I've not discussed with him at all, was there was some suggestion randomly about whether we should have a dispatchy type working group in Ops. And I'm not sure whether we need one, but it was just something that's. Does anyone have any thoughts as to whether that's a good idea or not? Do we need an Ops dispatch? Yep, go for it, Michael.
Oops.
I think that you have IoT up, and I think that Ops AWG could function as that as well, and the scheduling challenges of adding another group would kill the idea unless you did it strictly as virtual interim.
Yeah, if you figure out that Ops area working group gets overwhelmed by that kind of stuff, do something. do nothing before.
Okay. I mean, at the moment, it seems that a fair bit of ops areas, yang and mud all day, every day. So as long as people feel that they can still bring things to us and we can help dispatch them, I think that that's all working fine. Well, I think Tortoise has another minute or two before we've reached the top of his slot. But I guess while we're waiting, I think that both Rob and I would always appreciate any feedback on what we're doing well and what we're doing poorly, and where people would like us to focus more, etc.
The stuff that I'm doing poorly, you're welcome to send that directly to Nomcom, because I am going to stand again for the next term. So that's another place you can send it if you don't send it to us.
And yeah, I think that goes for me as well. I mean, I'm not up for re-election or whatever the correct term is this time. But if you are uncomfortable sending me grumpy things saying that I'm an idiot, feel free to send it to Nomcom. I always ask Nomcom if they would mind, please, providing feedback, even if I'm not being evaluated. Okay.
Elliot?
Well,
he's in the queue.
Elliot, did not see the queue.
Question around, actually. You guys have a pretty good view of the other areas. Are you finding that the other areas are doing a pretty good job at highlighting operational issues that need to come to us? Is the review process catching things that have operational impact? We are in the process, I think, of going through the chartering, for instance. And I don't really want to have the whole dialogue here about it, but I'm just using it as an example of the work of Oblivious HTTP. And, Martin, for instance, had this section about, reviewing operational considerations that are in the charter. Are others doing a good enough job of that in terms of their work? And are people, particularly in the ops community, experiencing problems because of new work coming out of the IETF? Or conversely, is it all working great?
I wouldn't necessarily say it's all working great, but it's not necessarily working very poorly either. Something which would actually have been good if we'd put on the agenda and spent more time on is talking some more about the Opsawg process. That Opsawg, I think it would be good if we could get more people participating in Opsawg and doing review. Thank you very, very, very much to everybody who does. And we could also be doing a much better job of recognizing people who are doing reviews. But anybody who is willing to do reviews in Opsawg and or provide just join Opsawg, I think would be incredibly helpful. Oh, we have a Tortoise.
Yep. So we're going to hand over to you. Tell us.
Okay. Are you having the slides preloaded?
Sorry, someone was asking to see the shirt on a separate chat. So
Turtles, I never got slides from you. I requested them, but I never got them.
Oh, that's crazy.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't think you have the ability to share, but if you sent them over to me, I could likely upload them.
That's different. I'm pretty sure I can't. Okay, so I got the 8 slots in this IETF. I'm sorry, one more. So this was in where is it? Second. Wait a second. Sorry, I wasn't prepared to hear that. Sorry. Okay, maybe it's really my fault, and I missed I gave the same presentation on Monday, first session to SACM. So
see. Yes, you can grant screen. There you go. And we can see your screen.
Yeah. And yeah, this is the wrong working group. Sorry for that. And it's even the wrong IETF. Okay, so I wanted to quickly just give an overview of what we did with Anima in the past 5 years, because we reached, I think, an important milestone. So this thing actually came from NMRG, which defined autonomic networks, into RFCs, which was focused on, automating service agent kind of, automation in the network on top of an infrastructure. And this infrastructure is basically what we took on in Anima then as the first working item. And it composes of 3 big components. And so, yeah, that was just, 5 years, 420 pages. And that cluster came out in May 2021. Hooray. So too bad that we couldn't celebrate in person. And I just wanted to quickly give an overview for the ops area, because I think there's a lot that can be reused. And obviously, we're also always happy. And that's a little bit the goal of this marketing exercise here, to get more ideas coming into Anima. So I'll leave a lot of the details here for people up to read in detail themselves, the overall architecture. I think what's much more interesting is how does it look to the operator. So assume you're simply starting to plug together routers and switches physically to a network, hook it up maybe to some management laptop or orchestrator controller, one device. These are all fresh out of the packaging, nothing configured. And what the ANI will do is automatically create an in-band virtual network as a second step. The first step is it enrolls all of the devices with PKI certificates, which also have ANI-specific information. It does the addressing. So in the end, what you have is a secure, automatically built and also automatically self-maintaining operational network, like previously and still today we have out-of-band networks, but it is in-band. And the security aspects, obviously, no unauthorized devices will connect into it. They're locked out, no user data is flowing, right? So this network is still not doing anything that you don't want it to do, because everything for the user still needs to be configured as you have today, or as would be future autonomic stuff. And obviously you can't spoof anything, because everything is encrypted hop by IPsec for this OEM network. And then all this functionality, of course, persists not only from day one, but through the whole life cycle. So it's automatically rerouting. So in this, VRF Lite network, we've got routing protocol running. Everything is IPv6, and all the certificates are also automatically renewed. So how do we do this? So the whole bootstrapping stuff, obviously, is one of the interesting core aspects. And I'm showing here that this actually can be very easy to configure. So, pre-standard industry implementations would have asked you purely say, okay, I want to have the so-called registrar, which is kind of the seed node, give it a name for the network, maybe also designate a specific unprotected network where you can hook up your local management laptop, so it doesn't need the whole ANI stack. And then there is an interesting backend aspect, which are called the manufacturing authorized signing authorities that you need to connect to, so that you get to the next stage, which is here. While the Bootstrap protocol, everything is difficult, but maybe some funny pictures and just showing who is involved in them gives you a better picture of what it does, right? So the registrar is really the central point that does everything. So we do know there are certificate authorities from which to get certificates. Ultimately, they need to get into what we call the pledges, which are the new devices that need to get into the network. We may not be able to be directly connected to them. These pledges may not have any addresses yet on the IP side. So we have automatically brought up proxies. Any device that's in the ANI and a new device connects to it will act as a proxy and helper. We have address allocation. There's the database needed. You may need admission policies, which devices get into the network. And ultimately, this MASA with a new digital artifact, which is the voucher, which basically tells the pledge, hey, you can trust this domain registrar. So you don't simply blindly need to trust any physical network you get connected to, because it may be the wrong one, or you may have been stolen or something, right? So that's basically the whole bootstrap in a wrap for you. And of course, we'll leave you all these details of how it works under the hood. So now we're on our second charter. So we added these ASAs in 2020. We're pushing actually back the intent, which is the high-level abstraction to NMRG. Also, if you're interested in that, how to abstractly operate your network, please check out NMRG. Really good work going on there. Hopefully, at some point in time, we can talk about a second pullover of that stuff into IETF, whether Anima or another working group. And then as far as where's adaptation, so we see a huge interest in the bootstrap stuff, which is proliferating through, you know, many working groups, and unfortunately also a humongous number of small tiny variation, because some industry wants to have yet another encoding of pretty much the same functionality. So we have follow-up documents in different working groups for variation of the stuff. Well, I guess there can never be enough standards. The ACP stuff, this automatically built connectivity, very little traction in the industry yet. So obviously, you know, if you have any interest in that, contact me. That's my favorite baby, but I see it as somewhat logical, because implementation in legacy infrastructures, I've done that in the past, is really very difficult and complex. And once we get more and more routers and switches that use containerized virtualized infrastructures or BMCs, that should become much more easy. And obviously, there are various prototypes for the different components of the ANI. So this is the landscape. I wouldn't even dare to start talking about, you know, what is where in which working group, but Michael Richardson has done a good job to creating the map of, you know, the bootstrap landscape, and there is even a draft and GitHub for that. So if we get back to it, and if you're interested in automating any parts of the network, I'd really love you to consider that the full ANI, or even just very simple subset of that, are really good basis for further automation, right? We give them, you know, any type of agents, strange names called ASA, but consider that as, for example, simple scripts, right? And I think we've seen a lot of problems in automating, especially security, whether it is the use of actual certificates in any end-to-end, like really certificates without just username and passwords for OEM operations into network devices. You just need the bootstrap across the network, some simple form of renewal of the certificates, and you have much better than username password. And if you then look into a lot of security and protocols, right? So there are a lot of protocols that have secure options or not have them, and the whole ANI provides a lot of options to help with. If you go through the ACP, you have automated security on top of the protocol, because everything is encapsulated into IPsec. But you can, of course, also automatically provision the certificates. And it's very easy, and we've done that in the past, to write simple scripts in Tcl or Python to basically automate even new signaling for, you know, distributing keys between neighbors that you can derive. So it should really be a good programmable platform built from few core software components to start automating. Now, security has been our favorite thing. Obviously, I think there are a lot more self-automation scripts that I've seen over the decades, and that I think would still be of interest to write, and get away from having, you know, humongously big, complex, centralized SDN controllers alone. Instead, I think we've often also heard from SDN controller people that they love to be able to push some decentralized automation into the network, and the ANI would be a great platform for that, we think. So this is the last pitch here, to the minute, right? So if networks were cars, on the left-hand side is our interpretation of what self-driving networks today are, right? So somebody, you know, or some SDN controller, orchestrator or so is really driving a really, really stupid network. Nothing against kids, sorry, I didn't mean to. But I think you get the point, that with Anima, we hopefully are creating the infrastructure to really enable really self-driving networks that come close to self-driving cars wherever that's desirable. And that's it. Thank you very much. Please engage with us. Right, we've got a mailing list.
Thanks, Dulles. Any questions from anyone? Don't see any. So thank you for that update. That was very useful. And I invite people again to join Anima for the next IETF. Otherwise, I think we're at the top of the hour, and we can say thank you for everyone. Got Opsawg and Ops area, and see you possibly not in person, but see you the next virtual IETF, I suspect, 112. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good weekend.
Thanks everyone for joining. Bye bye.